eyes riveted with
some kind of
some
handmade
kind of
bolt.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. All right, we're going. Hey, this is Fireside Tats, episode 38. My name is Jake.
58.
What did I say? 38.
See,
58.
it's a good thing there's two women here to correct him.
Yep. Episode 58, and we're still on our road trip. We're on the downside of it, headed back to M-Town this afternoon.
I'm not going to take that personally that you just called me the downside.
Oh, sorry. I didn't really mean that in a negative way.
How about the tail end or
the
something?
tail end, yeah. And so I wanted to make sure that while I was here that I introduced you guys to Christina Havens because we met maybe a year ago now at a workshop. This is her studio. It's an awesome studio. We'll kind of pan around and show it. But we met about a year ago, and she puts on workshops with painters from all over the country and brings people from everywhere to study and to paint for 3 days a week, whatever. And she also teaches full time. So that was the biggest reason I wanted to bring her in. First, I wanted to introduce her, and then also I wanted to bring her in because she is a painting instructor, and we're always trying to get people to explore other mediums. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious by other mediums. I mean, they should all just start oil painting. That's what I've been trying to say, I guess.
Really?
I guess,
Okay.
Because every time I say other mediums, all I do is introduce oil painters. So this is Christina. So start just with a little bit with your background, where you're from, how you started painting, education, all that kind of stuff.
I come from a long line of artists. So I grew up in a very creative home. My mother, was one of those people who we had a book report, it was like this very elaborate thing. So it was always a very creative environment. I was lucky enough to attend Buffalo State College where I got my BFA in painting. And
is that a big art school? Or is it?
It's actually, there's a couple big schools. Well, there's a couple universities in the Buffalo area. And I did start out at the University of Buffalo, which is a huge school. And their program, I think it was the first semester, like we were supposed to be doing installation pieces like in the stairwell. And I'm like, I would like to know about the color wheel. So, I had a craving for the basics from the beginning because I always felt compelled that I would want to teach. So I changed programs and went from UB, which was a huge university, to Buff State, which is a smaller college, but also right near the Albright Knox Art Gallery. So I had access to great art all the time. And it was a program that was much more geared towards making you a better artist, not with the basic skills, not the conceptual side of the work.
We heard that. We were both just at the Portrait Society convention this year, and I heard that, and I'm sure you did a handful of times. I know Jeff Hine talked about it, about being thrown into this environment where you were just supposed to discover yourself.
Right.
And he had a really, he had an interesting way that he put it. He was like, how can I write a poem if I don't speak the language? Like, I need to learn how to draw and how to paint, and you guys are trying to get me to express myself when I didn't have no idea how. It seems like it's pretty common. I mean, you're doing installation pieces as a freshman in college.
Yeah, it was just way too outside the box. And in graduate school, I did a thesis or a paper on, I'm going to say it, this is my horrible way of saying it, Wittgenstein. And one of his big quotes was, "The limits of your language are the limits of your world." And so the more you know about technique, the more you know about the basics, the more you know about color, the broader your world will get. Yeah. And he was talking about actual writing language, but it translates into art just as well.
Yeah, yeah. We talk about that some on the podcast. There are a lot of in tattooing. There are a lot of what are considered, when you're an apprentice, hard and fast rules. Like, you always work from dark to light, because you could smear dark pigments into your light pigments and create muddiness and all that. And it's like, okay, once you have that stuff down, it's great. You really need to know those rules. Then you can start to break them. And I think one thing that artists have gotten away from in the last 50 or more years is learning why they're breaking the rules.
Right. Absolutely. And I've seen it even, I had some really talented friends in high school who were fantastic at cartoons and, would make all these really muscular men and stuff. And then you would look at it and be like, he's got an extra calf muscle, it's just this really weird thing. So it's like, even, for those guys who are awesome and doing these great muscular cartoon guys, you still have to know the anatomy because it's not going to hold together if it doesn't make sense. And I love the quote when we were talking about Sargent, this conference we were at. There was a lot of Sargent themes going on, and they actually were reading some of the criticisms about other artists at Sargent's time. So as soon as Sargent got really big and popular, there were a whole bunch of new artists coming up doing these brushy strokes and, limiting the information and trying to capture what Sargent was doing. What they weren't doing was following his same path, which was a lot of drawing, a lot of realism, a lot of practice until he figured out how he wanted to express himself.
Yeah.
So you can't skip that step.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really obvious when you do. We just had a little bit of the same discussion with Jeff Hein in the last podcast. People trying to skip ahead, but just being rushed to get better, and they see things that they like, so they try to mimic the things that they like. But the person that created the thing that they like, there was a process to get to that, and there's just no way to cheat your way to it.
Right.
So that's a pretty good segue into. So you teach classes here in the studio pretty regularly. I've met quite a few of your students just through the workshop. Some of them are really good painters. Some of them are really
and
beginners.
they all have better said nice things about me.
As far as I know,
okay.
Well, you're always in the room, so
okay, right.
I mean, they whisper whenever you walk away.
Okay.
But I mean, so you're teaching people kind of across the board. Some of them
Sure.
are pretty talented and have a natural kind of knack. Some of them are really struggle. So for artists, maybe a tattoo artist that grew up drawing in sketchbooks but has never handled. Are they all oil painting classes?
I try to stick with oil painting just so that I can be consistent in the information that I give them. You've come and taken with Casey, you've come and taken with Jeff, and there are certain things across the board that it doesn't matter what medium you work with, it's all going to be very vital. But I just find that I can get more. Everybody's getting something more out of the class if we're all working in the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. So what are the common barriers that you see new painters hitting? Is drawing the biggest thing? I know when we were talking to Casey, drawing was so far down on his list of importance. But then you talk to someone like Jeff, and Jeff has you drawing forever before you ever touch a brush. And so there's so many schools of thought on it, I guess.
Well, I think with Casey Baugh's work is that he is always looking at this big picture right from the beginning. And I think one of his very first things to look at is composition. And when I'm talking with my oil painting students, because we have the flexibility of changing something down the road, if the color's not quite right, if our line's not quite right, we can always change that. But the big thing that can't be changed is composition. So you got to look at that in the beginning. And I think if people start from the beginning saying, I have to draw this eye correctly and not look at the big picture, then you can really throw yourself off. Drawing in general, though, and again, you look at Casey's work and he can nail it every time he draws it. So that's why in his particular process, it can be down the road as far as refining a painting. But it's absolutely vital to get to that point. And it's only through sketchbooks and everything else.
Yeah. So drawing is super important on the front end before you ever
Absolutely.
pick up a brush.
Yeah.
And I think especially with people that are starting out. Even the idea of building a composition might seem like way too complex of an idea.
Yeah.
Like, well, what even makes a composition a good composition or a bad composition? And I think it's only through drawing. One thing that I've noticed, and I think I've had a tendency to do as a beginning oil painter, is to start to draw too quickly, like or maybe drawing lines when I should be blocking in masses or things like that.
Sure.
And I've noticed that even looking at some of the people that are your students, is that first off, there's not a lot of paint on the canvas.
Yes.
And they're trying to draw really early on.
Right. Right. Well, I think what happens is if they there becomes a real preciousness about a line. It's like I've drawn this cheek and I feel like it's perfect, and now I'm putting everything in, and I'm just too cautious about changing that line. So if that's the kind of mentality that you get into, where you're kind of revering the line and you can't let it grow with your painting, then that's a kind of a crutch that you have to worry about. Yeah. There's other teachers, though, and some of them are very dear friends of mine, who will not let their students put any paint on the canvas until the drawing is perfect. Yeah. And one of the things I hesitate to do as a teacher is to try to give anybody a formula or this is the right answer. I am more along that line of how can I get you to be a better problem solver? Yeah. So, when I come up to somebody's canvas, I do treat them as an individual, and I do kind of think about what their goals are and where they're coming from. And especially if I've had them for a little while, I know what the things are that they have to keep working on. So if it's somebody who is really afraid to put paint on the canvas, then we talk a lot about painting language. If it's somebody who is just not getting the drawing right, then we talk about, really taking time to look at what's out there. So, there's all different kinds of schools of thought.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
hopefully at the end of the day, you're a good problem solver.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to look at it, because there's not one way to solve any
Right.
particular problem, and
Right.
it's that person's.
There have been
way
great
to,
paintings with hardly any paint on them, and then there's been really bad paintings with a ton of paint on them. So more paint is not always the answer.
right.
I think the other thing is, letting go of fear. And the only way you can let go of fear is to just keep trying it.
Yeah. One thing you bring up that I noticed that a lot of people do, and I was guilty of it too in art school, was thinking that you nailed an area, and then trying to bring everything else to that area. First off, you kind of cap what that drawing or painting can be whenever you're just trying to bring it to this area, and you're not working the entire thing. And like you said, you're really limiting yourself, or you have a crutch. And I used to have a teacher that was kind of brutal, but he would recognize that,
Yeah.
and he would walk over and just wipe that out of the
Oh,
painting
yeah.
for you, like not say a word. Like, I really felt like I nailed this eye, I had it perfectly, and he would walk through with his thumb and just push through it and be like, well, if it wasn't, maybe you got lucky and you got that eye. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
If you can do it again, then you didn't get lucky, and now you're forced to deal with the whole painting again.
Right. I know, God, college teachers are brutal, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm taking yoga now, and one of the instructors who really makes us work hard, and we'll be doing the same thing over and over and over again, and he said you have to embrace repetition, because only through repetition will you reach refinement. And so I've got a lot of students who do one or two still lifes, and they're like, okay, let's move on to portraiture. And I'm like, you gotta keep working on this. You haven't gotten to the point where you know all the answers yet in this part, and you got to keep going. And I think that's hard to slow down and get it right.
Yeah, you want to rush through, I think, and get better. That same teacher that I had used to tell me, and I had not painted a lot at that time, but he used 200 as his number. He was like, once you've done about 200 paintings, you're starting to get a feel of what the paint does, how you make marks. Like, then you can start making some educated decisions at that point. It's like, but until then, you're just figuring out how. And so I think people want to get past that, especially when they don't have an interest in in still lifes or in landscapes or whatever it is, and which I know I'm guilty of that. I want to paint what I want to paint. So.
And all I can say to that is you got to find ones that inspire you then, because if some still lifes are rather dull and very dark, and like, okay, I've seen an apple before, but then I see a still life some time and I'm like, man, it's like I've never seen a still life before. So find what inspires you. And one of the things that I tell students a lot is draw from life, copy the masters, and copy photographs. I think there's something you can learn from all three. And just look through some masterwork if you need some inspiration, and find the one that speaks to you, and figure out why, and bring that to your own work.
Yeah. Talking to Jeff and him being, such a stickler for drawing from and working from life exclusively. I was reading. Did you read the Alyssa Monk's article in that
I haven't
Painters
yet.
magazine?
Okay.
But she talked a little bit about that, and about how there's such a stigma attached to working from photographs, and people, and working from life is the only way to go. And she has a specific painting workshop that kind of addresses that issue, that you do work from you take photographs, you actually put the photographs next to the live model and try to understand what's happening, what you can use and what you can't. She even goes in and uses Photoshop to try to teach people how to manipulate and test different ideas and things like that. But she's really she had a much more clever way of putting it. But she basically was just using it as a tool and not as a means to an end. So
and it comes back to understanding, and do you have the experience to back up working from the photograph, because we just don't get that value range, all that wonderful, especially in a dark shadow. When you're working from a live model, there's so much more color in there, and the photograph, and especially if you go to a print, will really flatten that out. You don't have it anymore. So, but if you've got
the
enough
shadow
experience,
shape is just a shape.
Absolutely. So as long as you again have the experience to solve that problem, you can do it.
Yeah, and Jeff made the comment that he could paint from a photograph now, and it would be because he knows the information that he can take from it. But it only came from after tons
Lots
and tons
of practice
from life. Okay, so So are there really common problems that you see that are kind of across the board that people run into? I know you said, obviously you have to work on your drawing
Sure.
separately from oil painting. Composition is something that a lot of people don't consider whenever
In
they
the
first start to
beginning.
paint.
Yep.
We mentioned a little bit not using enough paint or drawing too early, and I think I think that really makes even if the drawing is nice and then you nail the value in the colors, I think for the most part when there's no paint anywhere on the canvas, it just looks amateurish. When
Yeah.
you can see the texture of the board or whatever through it, it always looks like an amateur did it to me.
And in some ways, that also goes back to learning what works for you and your voice. So learning what language helps you reach that. So if you are a rather thin painter, and there's a lot of thin painters out there, maybe you're not supposed to be working on canvas. Maybe you're supposed to be working on a really smooth gesso board.
Yeah.
That way, that quality of the paint is not competing with the canvas.
Right.
And so that might be a solution to your particular language style.
Right.
I think that the other things that I see people running into is just not frequently enough
You hear that?
doing. your pocket is
My
talking
pocket's
to me.
going crazy right now.
Rude. Okay.
Yeah, sorry guys. I think I just called my grandmother.
You didn't fax her a picture of your butt, did you? All right.
I don't think this one faxes. It probably faxes. I'm sure.
Well, I think one big is the distraction of technology that
Right.
people have to work on.
I think that is true. That's another episode, probably.
A whole nother episode. I think it's just like getting to a point where you're building on what you know. So if you're only coming into class one day a week for 3 hours and you're expecting to get better, or you're getting frustrated because you're not getting better, you're just not putting in the time. So if you enjoy watching TV, then have your sketchbook while you're watching TV. Go find different ways to be doing a little bit of it every day. It does not mean you have to set up your whole still life setup or your whole oil painting or whatever. Just sketch a little bit every day. Engage that part of your brain so that you are learning those problem-solving techniques. So there's just no way around of actually putting in the time.
Yeah. I think that I forgot to bring it up when we were talking to Jeff yesterday, but he had such a great analogy for that whenever at his workshop some months back when he said that we talked about the term starving artist. You remember
Yeah.
He was just like, do you know why? It's basically just talks about putting in the time, that it is a job, that it is work.
Sure.
But he said, imagine the reason there are starving artists or the reason that term exists is imagine if the only requirement to call yourself a doctor was for your mom to think you knew a lot about medicine.
Right.
It's just like anyone can call themselves
Sure, an artist.
and it's like and it just takes a ton of work. I mean, and the crazy thing is like when other jobs take a lot of work, but you get paid to do the work in the meantime.
Right.
I mean, this is something that you have to you have to take a long-term approach. And
it's not a bad thing. I mean, the journey is fantastic. I mean, when you look back at all the stuff that you accomplished, all the different things that you've tried, it should be exciting. It should not be a burden to enjoy this. I mean, how many we saw, let's see, Daniel Green, Burton Silverman, Max Ginsburg. These guys are in their 70s, their 80s, and they're sharp and they're active. And it's like, this is going to be a fantastic journey. Enjoy the journey, and really figure it out. And you're putting yourself out there every day. Put the best version of yourself out there and work as hard as you can to do it.
Yeah. And I bet any one of those guys would trade positions with us in a heartbeat just to have
to be able to do it all over again.
And to lose every ounce of skill that they've developed and just to be able to experience the process again, because I'm sure any one of them would say that it's not about where they are right now. It was the journey to get there. And and it's such a there's so many obstacles and it's easy to get frustrated and there are tons of, and it's not an easy way to make a living if you're trying to So a lot of people are juggling, trying to be a better artist with
being
waiting
your own
tables
accountant, beating your own, self-promotion, and Christina81.com.
That's right. We're gonna put up we're gonna drop your website information and
Secretary and everything. I mean, there is a lot of other roles into being a independent artist if you're not in a gallery, and even if you are in a gallery, now what's really great is that you do have a lot of almost immediate connection to any artist you see anywhere in the world. Whether you send them a message on Instagram or Twitter or on their Facebook page, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, a lot of artists do get overwhelmed with that sense that we should reciprocate and respond in a timely manner, so that it does get into your painting time.
Yeah, I bet, and especially with the way that social media has come. I know a lot of artists get kind of a bad picture painted of them because they're overwhelmed with people bombarding
Yeah.
them, wanting information, and then
Yeah.
they look like assholes because they're
Right.
ignoring
They're not
everyone.
answering. Like I emailed him yesterday and he hasn't gotten back to me.
Right, like
Yeah, it's gonna happen. Maybe he has a brush in his hand. I don't know.
Maybe.
You know.
But yeah, there are just so many obstacles in the way. Just for a second, talk about you started along those same lines of it being difficult to make a living doing this, and you
Sure.
have a great studio space that you have to support and all that. There are other ways to create an income off of this
Sure.
besides selling your paintings. You starting to bring these workshops to Woodstock is, first off, you get great painters that I'm sure that you learn from, even though
Absolutely.
you're not physically part of the workshop.
Yes.
But it's also another source of income. It's a way to bring to introduce your studio to
New artists.
new
Yes,
artists.
Absolutely. Well, when I started doing it, I said I'm only going to bring in the best of the best, and I want people who are. We do have a lot of fabulous artists in the Atlanta area, but for me, it was like we need to bring people in. I do feel incredibly lucky and privileged to work in such a beautiful space that was done so nicely by my studio partner Ann Luttrell about 8 years ago, and now downtown Woodstock is a great little place to come visit, and it's just about my enthusiasm for learning, and I just want everybody else to share in that. And you're absolutely right. It's like I get to learn, I get to be in the atmosphere of these great artists for a week or two, and every time I watch a teacher teach, I become a better teacher as well. So there's the financial aspect of it, but there's also the growth aspect of it.
Yeah. I think and there's just no way we would have met otherwise. It's just
Yeah, I
you
would
meet
have
tons of
avoided you
other-
forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell because every time I would say something beforehand, you just.
I don't know this guy.
So what are you working on right now? Mostly, are you doing more commissions, or are you working on your own projects?
I am lucky. I just had a couple of commissions that I finished up recently. What I try to do is have I do about a third and a third and a third. I do about a third of just selling my work, either prints or originals online, and then I do.
Where do people find that?
I'm on Etsy. And I've been there since 2008, and we could have a whole discussion just on how the online market has changed and just how difficult it is to be found, and it's very, very different. I'm glad I got on when I did and built up the audience I did when I did, because I think it's even harder now.
I bet.
But so selling my own work on Etsy, teaching, and then taking commissions. Usually at least 1/3 of that is doing really, really well, and then the others sometimes have ebb and flows. But if you're only always trying to sell just your work, it might not always be there. So you got to kind of spread out.
And
you
you intentionally try to split those into thirds for that reason.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're going to put up, we probably have been clipping in Christina's work throughout this. Etsy store, website, what's the best ways to find you? How to get in touch with you?
Online, my I guess is my avatar, my name or whatever. It's Christina81 with 2 Y's, Krystyna, and then the number 81. And I'm going to start telling everybody that's the year I was born, because it makes me a lot younger.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
That's a good idea. 81. Yeah, because I think now that you mentioned it, I know where it actually came from. So that's good. Tell them that. And I just realized I have your name misspelled in my phone, too. I didn't know it was 2 Y's.
But it's only on my paintings. I really want to keep people guessing. So it's actually originally Christina with 2 I's.
Okay.
But
That's how I have it.
the Polish side of my family is where I get all my artistic talent from. No offense to the Italian side. Thank you for my chubby knees and my aggressive behavior. But so as like an homage to my Polish side, I did it the Polish spelling, which is 2 I's.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're
we really didn't have time for that, but I went into it anyway.
No, perfect. I'm sure we'll do this again at some point. We're gonna. One other thing I was gonna say. You keep the workshops updated on your website. There are a couple of really good workshops coming up this fall. I don't guess either. They're probably not full yet, are they?
I would hop on them pretty quick, because they were
quickly.
promoted pretty well at this convention. Carrie Dunn is coming in October, and he's a fabulous teacher, especially to give you some really good foundations for not only building a drawing, but understanding color. And then Jeff Hine is coming back for a 3-day workshop, and Jeff is not only fantastic in the drawing concepts and everything, but just talking about the characteristics of paint and how to make a better painting just from understanding things. Something simple as studying opaque versus transparent. Just
blew my-
mastering that. Yeah.
He made me feel like he complete moron talking about that stuff. Just like, that makes so much sense. Yeah, Jeff is full of great information. Christina is always walking around during these workshops, and while she doesn't step on the toes of the person doing the workshop, she's great about stepping in and helping out if you're struggling. There are painters from professional artists all the way to like housewives that are
Right.
just trying to find something to do with their time. So don't come in feeling, intimidated at all. There's every walk of life in here. You'll meet a lot of cool people.
And I make coffee and buy donuts. So,
She
yeah.
is the. I wasn't gonna say Woodstock wife because I think it kind of paints you in a weird light.
Kinda
But by
weird.
Woodstock wife, I mean she always has coffee and donuts. There's a bathroom and a kitchen,
I have phone chargers,
phone
all
chargers,
kinds
all
of,
that stuff.
yeah.
Extra easels.
Q-tips. It's
Right.
really bizarre.
Bright pink paint that you're welcome to use.
Right.
But the Jeff Hine, I can attest to, is a great workshop if you can get in on that. Woodstock is about 30 or 40 minutes north of Atlanta. It's not far from Atlanta. You can fly into Atlanta and be here quickly. The Carrie Dunn workshop, I am signing up for. So if you want to hang out with me, come to that.
Yay.
I met him this past weekend, and I really like his work.
He's a cool guy.
Yeah, it's KERRYDUNN.
DUNN. And that one, he's with Studio Incominati, which is up in Pennsylvania. So if you can't get a hold of me, you can go to their website. It's called an In Your Town workshop. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Perfect. Come to it. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thank you.